Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Cotton Incorporated and brought to you by Cotton Works. My name is Jen Lee, and I'm a manager of marketing and industry programs within the global supply chain at Cotton Incorporated. I'll be moderating today's webinar. Hopefully you're all aware of Cotton Incorporated and what we do as a company. We're a not-for-profit organization that researches and promotes cotton with the goal of helping companies use more cotton in their products and improving their overall cotton business. And we know that business has been tough for many this year. Please know that we're here as a resource for you through webinars like today and also in other forms of support. One of those forms of support is to the textile industry is Cotton Works. Cottonworks.com is a free online resource for every stage of the product developing and marketing process. Through Cottonworks, we bring you the latest in innovative production methods, marketing trends, sustainability efforts, economic updates, nonwovens education, and expert support, all so that you can stay up to date and inspired while you produce and market your cotton products. You can consider Cottonworks your go-to tool for discovering what's possible with cotton. And I'll tell you to stay tuned to the end of the webinar, and I will tell you how to access today's slides on the website. Feel free to submit your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're saving some time towards the end of the webinar when we will get to all your questions that are relevant to today's topic. Today's topic is timely given the current pandemic climate and the new normal that follows. I'd like to introduce today's speaker at this topic, Alexis Mondragon, technical designer, knitwear specialist, and sweater consultant for Cotton Incorporated. Now I'd like to invite Alexis to start off today's presentation.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm very excited to be here with everybody. I hope everyone is safe and well where you're located. And let's get going. A little bit about myself is I've worked in the knitwear industry for the last decade at different capacities, some in design, tech design, and in production, and specifically working in factories in production. So in flatbed and in circular factories, I've worked in product development, production, tech design as well. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer, or if you've missed any of the videos or if it's glitchy because of the internet, let me know and I'll try to clear things up if going forward. All right, we're going to look at the agenda today. We are going to be discussing artwork and body mapping and how the engineered design kind of helps creating that artwork and then showing examples of it. And then we're going to go into the design and we're going to look at Cotton Incorporated's FABRICAST and then the process going into the design process and how to accomplish what your design is. So the design of sweaters is critical in the garment's performance, cost, quality, and salability. Design considerations include yarn type, fabric structure, coloration, and garment shape. Fiber, yarn, knit structure, and finishing processes affect the finished dimensions and hand of the sweater. So when we look at the different artwork design considerations, we want to look at the color, the structure, and the shape. And we're going to go through in this presentation all three and how it affects, especially how to apply color in terms of your artwork. So that's the jacquards, options, and tarja, stitch structure, and how you can create different areas of your garment in stitch structure, and then obviously your overall shape of your garment and how that those decisions really affect your design. Technologies do exist that facilitate engineered designing. If a designer lacks the vocabulary to communicate the design, the potential of it being compromised is very high. So, you really have to understand the basics of knitting and the different vocabulary in order to communicate with your factory. Communication involves verbal, written, technical specifications, and graphic skills. Innovation is facilitated when concentration of energy can focus on the idea generation rather than the implementation of product. So your adaptiveness of CAD design, ability to capitalize on the technologies that are coming out, and knowledge of production routes. So also like where you're gonna have this produced and what are their capabilities of their machines. That's really important to part of this design process, is understanding and reaching out to your factories and being able to design smart for that garment. You know, sometimes people have these elaborate ideas and they want all these colors, and sometimes just not production friendly because A, it could be very costly, or it's just not possible. It takes too much time. Again, very costly to end up creating some of these designs. You have to really design smart and understand the capabilities. Okay. So we're gonna take a turn. We're gonna look at some of the most important things in creating artwork for knitwear, and that is stitch count. You really have to understand and know what your garment stitch count is gonna be in order to create this artwork. So stitch count is in a square inch of your fabric, how many courses per inch, and how many wales per inch. And sometimes you can get this information from your factory and they'll be able to tell you the exact stitch counts of the fabric. Or, you know, you can have a trusty little tool that you can get. This one is from Cotton Incorporated, but it has already a little square designated to put over your fabric and actually count those courses and wales in that inch. And it has a magnifying glass at the top, and it helps you see those really fine gauge fabrics that you need to count those stitch counts. But a lot of times your factory will be able to give you that information after they make a swatch for you. So for example, if you look at this swatch, this has 18 courses per inch and then 15 wales per inch in this specific swatch. So this information is very important when creating the artwork, and you always have to keep it, especially we'll show you later how to create your artwork, and these numbers are so important to create that artwork file. So jacquard structures usually include weft, knit, single jersey, and rib jacquards. Rib jacquards are comprised of flat jacquards and relief designs. And then flat designs are described by the design area, whether it is full, large, or small design area, the number of colors, and the type of backing, which we'll go through in the next slide. And the advantages of the jacquards are design motifs can be large and very complex, and multiple colors and types of yarns can be used. Sorry, where's my mouse? Oh, there it is. So when we look at this jacquard example, the technical face is the same for all the different types of backs that your jacquard can have. And if you look at the BMP file right here next to it, that just indicates, you know, it's 4 pixels wide per 4 pixels high, which can mean anything in the back of that fabric. How is that jacquard being constructed? And then if you look below it, we have your ladder back jacquards here, your float back jacquards, your bird's eye back jacquard, and your tubular jacquard. So there's all these options for these jacquards and how the back of the fabric's going to look. And mostly, you know, you have to design very smart. Sometimes if you're designing something that has a bird's eye back, you just have to have less colors so that the fabric isn't that heavy. You don't use a lot of yarn. So I wouldn't suggest doing more than 3, sometimes 4 different colors in a bird's eye back. Sometimes you can section it out where you can introduce new colors as you go, but you know, primarily you want to stay with 3, no more than that. And the float back ends up being the lightest type of jacquard. You use the less amount of yarn, but there's no stretch to it. There's no stretch to something like that has lots of floats in the back because you have those loops that are not able to stretch. So you just have that little slack in the back. And then with the ladder back, it ends up being lighter than a bird's eye. You're using a little bit less yarn, and you can put those little patches of ladder back even in the areas that you want, just to make sure that you can get the type of jacquard that you're looking for. Another way to design artwork is the use of intarsia. Intarsia knitting is a coloration method where two or more colored yarns overlapping along the course of the fabric to form separate fields of color within a design motif. Each colored yarn is fed through a different carrier that knits across the adjoining color. So if we look at the technical face and the technical back of this fabric here, you can see that each of these fields of color are specifically for that color. There's nothing in the back of the fabric that is a jacquard saying, you know, we're floating in the back or anything. In jacquard knitting, the aesthetics of design coloration may be compromised because of the grin through of the color, and we don't like that sometimes. So intarsia is kind of the way to get around that. You just have to make sure that the machine capability is able to do intarsia, and how many feeders you need, how many colors you can introduce are all dependent on that machine capability. So you just have to make sure that you design smart. And intarsia provides a seamless transition between color fields and a clear color definition. Each colored yarn knits only on its own color field rather than floating across the back of the fabric. Let's see. Another way to apply color is plating. And if you can see in this image here, above, you have your front and your back bed, or your cylinder and your dial. And you can see that you have yarn carrier A, and then you have yarn carrier B that sits right behind. Yarn carrier A appears in front of the fabric, while yarn carrier B goes to the back. But you can reverse it and use those two colors in a way that you can put B in front. So one will represent, so stitch A, yarn carrier A, will be that cream color, and it's in the jersey stitch. But then if you reverse the position, you will be able to get that other color that's sitting in the back of that fabric to the front, and it will be in reverse jersey. So this is another way of applying color. You can also, in your artwork design, use stitch structure and little different sections of stitch structures in your artwork design. And so all of these different little pixels of color represent a stitch, and then each color represents the action that it's doing. So this is a look on stitch structure. Specifically, each little cable is represented there. And then you can see what it looks like in actual stitch form. And so that can also be designed specifically if you want to just do one little motif. You can design that in your stitch structure artwork. And if you look here, this is an example of a 2x2 rib where the red in this artwork represents your jersey and your green represents your reverse jersey. So this is a 2x2 rib, meaning it will be 2 pixels wide on each of these to create that stitch structure. Purl, same thing. You're looking at your red representing your jersey and your green representing your reverse jersey. And this is just what it would look like for this stitch structure. If you want to create it this way in your artwork. Sometimes people don't need to do it. You can just say this specific field is going to be green, and this means it's going to be a purl stitch, you know, 2x2 or whatever it may be. We can go through that in a little bit. So now let's look at engineered designing for activewear. Functional attributes are comfort, fit, wear, extensibility. Aesthetically, you're looking at the color and the structure. And then, so your stitch structure shapings, we have stitch fundamentals, inside shaping, and outside shaping. This really refers to more full fashion or cut and sew, and how you use your stitch structures for benefits such as ribs to pull in something that you want tighter to the body, or certain types of jacquards that are water wicking or easily, breathability, those types of things. Sorry, there we go. The engineered design of activewear continued. We have functional finishes for cotton activewear, such as cotton incorporated, storm cotton, trans dry, wicking windows. Those are also different areas that you can implement different artwork. Some yarns could be, have trans dry, and some portions of your body can have it, or it could be all over. You can choose to put yarns in different places for the purpose, functional purposes. And then simulation, yarn structure, product array, and limitations. Let's talk about body mapping. Body mapping is very important when creating artwork. The engineer of fabric design properties within the shape of a product is an iterative and often highly collaborative design process within the textile complex. The purpose of this engineered design is to improve functional aspects of the product and improve aesthetic of the design. Your functional portion of body mapping would be decreasing of waste, increase comfort, fit, and movement, reinforce areas of high wear, and improve performance. So those are all your functional aspects of body mapping. And for aesthetic reasons, you want to create seamless design, accentuate your shape, accentuate the movement, and then strategically place logos or color blocks or patterns in specific areas, just so that it's more aesthetically pleasing. Obviously you're gonna choose where those artworks are gonna be placed, and that's part of body mapping. Sorry. Knit structure placement or body mapping can improve functional aspects of the product, such as performance and comfort, by reinforcing areas of high impact, abrasion, and wear, and can improve comfort and fit for better dexterity. Sorry, guys. So when we're looking at a body mapped BMP file, this specific image is of a single jersey circular machine. And if you picture this, slit open and flattened, that's what it would look like, not as a tube, but flattened out. And so you can see that it's an image of a tank top. You can see that the center front and center back are already in place there. You can see that with BMP files, the whole point is to use color to show the different stitch structures or placement of yarn that you want to implement. So on this specific BMP file, your green equals your jersey. So on this file, you have a jersey stitch as your base, and it's in cotton 30s 1. Your gray color is your 2x2 mock rib, also in cotton 30s 1. And then your yellow represents the mesh, and that we're using a polyester. And then your orange is a 2x2 mock rib. So because I say mock rib, it's on a single jersey machine, meaning the limitation on this machine can't do real ribs. So you have to use a mock rib, which is completely possible. But you just have to know your machine's capabilities and design for that machine, so that you don't run into, oh, well, we can't do a rib. Well, what can you do, type of thing. So we're talking about smart design. Highly engineered knit products are functional, comfortable, ease of movement, and durable. And for aesthetically pleasing aspects are good fit, clean, streamlined lines, on-trend color and pattern. So you can have a really great transition from your workout to everyday life. You know, you can, a lot of these designs now you see people wearing them in everyday life, you know, leggings and workout active wear, you see everywhere, people wearing them, going from the gym to then, or prior to the gym to later usually. This is an example of something that's body mapped, and this is a sports bra. And the functional aspects of this, there are no side seams. So this was made on a circular machine with no side seams. It has shaped cups with the use of reciprocal knitting for a better fit. The mock rib under the bust adds support and shaping. And there's a mesh structure that's placed on the back of the garment to increase moisture evaporation. And aesthetically, it's a more flattering fit. It has textural interest that was added in with the use of intarsia and stitch structure placement. And this was a seamless design. So aesthetically, you know, you don't have those comfortability and you don't have those side seams, but aesthetically you also don't have that interruption or trying to match your pattern on the side. Looking at body mapping here, this garment was made on a circular machine on a Santoni SM8TR1S. It comes off as a tube. And then it ends up becoming this specific garment was a raglan sleeve top. And you can see that the body map stitch placements are very particularly specifically placed. You have the mesh for breathability, your rib to bring it in so that it hugs your body. And it shows you the cut lines of where to cut. So this is what we're gonna go through today, how to create these body mapped artwork files that you can create on Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator so that you can create something like this with ease. So when we look at FABRICAST, Cotton Incorporated's FABRICAST library is a series of cotton-rich fabrics, our fabric collections designed by the product development team at Cotton Incorporated. And you can really see that with FABRICAST, you are able to choose between different types of fabric, wovens or knits, and then you can use them into your 3D animation or avatar of these garments. And so Cotton Incorporated has put this out for everyone to use. And I'm gonna use a couple of the examples in my example of our design that we're gonna be creating next. So I've designed this activewear piece using 3 different stitches from FABRICAST. So it's a basic activewear garment. I've chosen a trans dry yarn, 30s single. The first swatch I was really interested in was a jacquard, but with stitch structure. It's a double-faced fabric. And the front has an appearance of a herringbone stitch. And I thought that was a really interesting type of stitch. And this one is using trans dry technology. The next swatch is a 1x1 rib. It's made on a double knit machine, also using trans dry. And the third would be also a rib transfer as more breathability. It transfers the water wicking from the sides wherever you sweat more. I put them in specific locations, also not just for aesthetic, but for functionality. So when we look at this design, you can see that that jacquard is placed right here on the top and on the sleeves. So you have that jacquard at the top and then your 1x1 rib here in the center, and it's strategically placed so that it hugs the body in the specific areas under the bust, and in the back it cinches in your waist as well. And then on the sides you have that rib transfer where it's just also aesthetically pleasing, but it also has functionality to it. You want to hug your body with this, you know, it's tight fitting. And this is going to be made on a double jersey seamless knitting machine, so it can do true ribs. Obviously, I've chosen structures that have actual ribs in them. And this is no side seams. So if this is on a circular machine, there's no side seams, and I can create my self start here. And so the only cut and sew aspects would be your armhole, your sleeve, your under inseam, your shoulder, and your neck. So those are the parts that are going to be cut and sew aspects. But this specific artwork that I'm going to example today is for this garment. So looking at the 3 stitches that I've chosen here, the most important thing that for these stitches in order to create the artwork is your stitch count. And so if we look at the jacquard stitch structure, you can see that the stitch count is 35 courses per inch by 29 wales per inch. And all 3 of these have different stitch structures. So you have to do a lot of math in order to figure out where all of these stitch placements are going to be put and how we're going to utilize the stitch count in order to determine that. When you look at the 1-by-1 stitch structure, you have 44 courses per inch by 28 wales per inch. And then for your rib transfer, you have 42 courses per inch and 53 wales per inch. So that's very different from the other 2. They're all on the same machine. They are all 18 gauges. Now, how to get this information? Again, you can use your little tool here to count your stitches per inch, or you can have your factory tell you what they are, and that will help you design your artwork. So if you look at this spec here for this garment, you have the measurements represented in inches, and then I also have next to it the measurements represented in stitches per inch. And now all of these numbers were determined by that stitch count. So I already went in and did all the math and put in all of those measurements so that when I'm doing my artwork, I don't have to continue trying to figure out what is what. So these a lot of times your factory will do your stitches per inch and you don't have to provide that. You just have to provide your spec. But if you're providing the artwork, you're going to need to know what those numbers are. It's very important. So your artwork is created in a 3-step process utilizing Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. And this is how I create the artwork. These final BMP files that you create can easily be translated into M1 Plus for Stole or for Shimasheki that has different programs. So those types of programs that these machines have are so expensive, and we're not saying that everyone should have an Apex system for Shima or an M1 Plus. So really easy way to create this is through Illustrator and Photoshop, and they're easily translatable into all different types of machine programs. So the artwork size is predetermined by your stitch count, like we've been discussing, and then your body size cylinder or your panel dimensions. If you're doing full fashion and your panel is, you want it to be 10 inches, you have to place that artwork that you create within that panel's 10 by whatever it is. So thinking about your stitches and your artwork, you have to remember that in Photoshop, we use pixels. Each pixel represents 1 stitch on your garment. So that's how we create the files, using the stitch count with the pixel counts, and you're able to create them that way. So for example, if your body length from high point shoulder is 24 inches, and you have 2 stitch structures, which means you have 2 different stitch counts. So I made it super difficult today, but as an example, it's great because then you can see, oh, I have to calculate 2 different types of stitch structures that happen to be in that length of that garment. So if we look at that jacquard, the jacquard goes from high point shoulder to under bust, and that's 11 inches. So if we remember from our jack card, it was 35 courses per inch in that little square, and times 11, which is the amount of inches it needs to be for the placement, you end up with 385 courses per inch. And now the rib structure is a little different. You have from your underbust to hem would be 13 inches. This is just based on the spec, right? And where you want that artwork to be placed. So we have 13 times 44 courses per inch, which then you end up with 572 courses per inch. You add the two together, and that's 957 courses per inch. So that's how long or how many pixels in the length that your artwork needs to be, is 957. Now, with the artwork that I'm doing is a circular machine. The circular machine is already predetermined how many needles are in that machine. So in this specific machine, I believe it was 966. So I've made my artwork 966 wide, pixels wide, by 957 pixels high. And so that's how you determine how big your artwork is. So you arrange your smart guides to help plot out your artwork. So if you see in the image here that I have all these smart guides laid out and locked so that you're able to create your artwork with ease and you don't have to start guesstimating, eyeballing any placement. You actually have it with math mapped out before you start. The placement of guides are calculated based on your stitch count and your spec. So for example, this line that I've highlighted here is your armhole depth from high point shoulder. So that's 7.5 inches from high point shoulders where we want this spec to be. So it's 7.5 times 35 courses per inch, because that's what the jack card was. And you end up with 262.5 pixels per inch here. And that's how far you need to put that guide down. So I'm going to show you a little bit of an example of how to do it. And we can see here by using, first we're in Illustrator. So I wanted to create a rectangle that indicates where the guides are going to be placed. So I've done 106 by 385. Now that is your side panel where that rib transfer is. And that is your side panel to your underbust. And that's just how you can make your squares in any way you want, and you can plot out how you want. Sometimes you don't have to do as many. But in this case, I've plotted out everything so that I can draw my artwork with ease. And you can see I'm pulling down those smart guides to click into where that rectangle is. And I move the rectangle, and you can see those smart guides are still there. Now my next square is for the jack card from the top to the 1x1 rib start. And so I have the predetermined measurements there with the pixels per inch. And then I place it where I want the square to be. And you can see that I'm going to pull the guides to fit that artwork. And so I can plot it out. That will be the top of the rib structure. And then that will be where your next side panel ends up sitting. So you can see that we're already plotting out, we're sectioning it into different sections. And now we're going to put that final side panel in place. And you can see it clicks right in. And boom, you have it plotted out, your general, plot. And you can continue going. I will continue here with the third rectangle, which indicates your center front or center back position, to your armhole depth, which we already did the math for. So that's 188.5 pixels for your center front, center back placement in this specific artwork. And then by 262.5, which we just looked at that example, to your underarm placement. And so we're going to create a square to then pull the guides to lock into here. So you can see we're going to pull down that guide. That's where your armhole placement's going to be, your high point shoulder, and then that's your center front of that panel. And then you want to do it on the back panel as well. So we're going to move that there. And so we can show your center back is going to be right there. So it's all plotted out. Now, so after you get your lines and your grid and you lock them in, make sure that they're locked, then you can start drawing your artwork. So I have all of these lines and I have a diagram that I make next to me so I'm not confused as to what is what. And I'm able to create my artwork with ease because all of these guides are in place. And so I'm going to start creating artwork with putting color. Each color represents a different stitch structure. So you will be able to kind of see what I mean in a second. So there goes the front panel. It's the front neck drop. And then you go down to where that bust line is going to hit. So everything's kind of generalized. And you do it in layers. And you know, you don't have to put your exact cut line. Sometimes people just put the general stitch all the way up and then you can just put a pattern piece over it. But I find it a lot easier and it saves time in production if you put your cut lines in. And sometimes you can determine that after you already do your artwork and trials of it. You can determine where those cut lines are and then you can fill in the space later so that you have an actual sample until you put those cut lines in. So you can see here, creating that armhole. And it's a little bit like, you know, trying to figure out where those lines need to be. And a lot of times after it's knit, it's sometimes doesn't look the way you want it to. And you're gonna have to alter these files, or sometimes your factory can go from there. You know, they don't have to have every single file has to be redone. You can have them then tweak it afterwards. So you don't have to keep on submitting new artwork files. So here you can see that, you know, using the different tools, mostly drawing tools, to create these sections. And then you can copy and paste so that it's mirrored, so that you have that front panel. And so we're just perfecting it there. And copy paste, and we can create the front and the back. So everything just needs to be, you know, shifted a little bit just to make it more aesthetically pleasing, or so that your line looks better. And it doesn't have to be perfect, probably on your first run, just to get a good example of it for your factory to kind of see what you want, and then they can probably, you know, judge it a little bit. So I fast forward a little bit there. Now we have our front panels, and we're going to create the side panels here. The side panel will be in a different color to indicate the different stitch structure. So I think we're gonna use green next. And you can see that with the use of the smart guides, we will be able to create each section pretty easily here. And you can see it's already in yellow, which is wrong. We need it to be in another color because otherwise they're gonna think that that's part of that stitch structure. So we're gonna change it to green so that we can notify and make sure that we know that that's a different stitch structure there. And you can do this with different types of jacquards, or if you want to create some kind of intarsia artwork and then place it in your panel if it's a full-fashioned, definitely you're able to kind of manipulate any type of artwork the same way. As I'm doing this with stitch structure, you can do it just with color. Like we looked at our jacquard BMP file of that, those little squares, that is your repeat. You don't have to do it for if it's only in one section, you can just say, this is that, this is that stitch structure. Or if you need some type of artwork that indicates different colors, then you can put different colors in. But again, you have to know your limitations with your factory, how many colors you can put in. It's all, you really have to understand kind of everything to be able to really accurately do these. So you can see here, I'm gonna do the last color section of the 1x1 rib. And this is indicating your 1x1 rib section, and it's gonna be under the bust on the front, and on the back it's gonna come down, and it's more aesthetic, type of artwork stitch placement, so that you are able to kind of get the benefits of the function of that stitch. So you can see, you can just like fiddle around with it, try to create a really seamless shape that you want. And it could take some time, sometimes it can take an hour or so to get it right. And that little handle's hard to see there because it's almost the same color. There it is. So you're creating this in Illustrator, and so that you're using vectors at this point. And so you're gonna input this into Photoshop next in order to create that perfect BMP file. So you can see it's really coming along. You can see that the underbust section is almost done, just perfecting the shape. Right. And now we're gonna copy paste so that it can be mirrored on the other side. So you can really see how those guides are really helping you with placement of stitch structure and how you want it to look. We're gonna mirror it. Great, and then pull it down to that position. Make sure it locks in. You can always move it around. So see, there's your front of that panel there. And then you can see the back. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna create that artwork. Right, and we watching the guides, that's the predetermined position where we want it to be. We want it to hit on your body. And then just perfecting that curve just to make it aesthetically pleasing. Almost done here. So there you have it. And then we're going to copy paste to the mirrored side so that everything is symmetrical. And there are Photoshop extensions designed by Stoll that you can also use to create these artwork files where it's specifically for Stoll. So they have your different stitch counts or amounts for different machines capabilities that they have. that are predetermined in there. So here we're just saving the file. I always save it as both an Adobe Illustrator file as well as a BMP file, because if you need to go back and make changes, you definitely want to have that original Adobe Illustrator file before then you might have to redo it. So you really want to just save it. I save it as both. And then we're going to do the BMP file, which you export. And then you can change it up at the bottom there to BMP. And so that is, make sure that everything is set. And you want it to be, I always choose a high pixel per inch, just so that, we can get a really clear lines. And it doesn't have to be a high bit, just the lowest bit you can do. And always keep it for Windows, because most of these programs for the machines are always a Windows-based product. So now from there, we're going to input it into Photoshop. And from there, we're going to clean up the lines and make sure that everything is set first. So again, we're going to look at the image size. That's way too big. We're going to set our pixels per inch for this specific file. And remember, our width is going to be 966, and then our height is 957 pixels per inch. And that was predetermined before going in. And then we're going to clean up the file to just make sure that there are clean lines, because each color represents a different stitch structure in this specific artwork file. So we don't want to have any blurred lines or other colors that are introduced, because that's going to really confuse the program that you're going to be inputting it into. If there's more than that clean, you see that line is very blurred. There's not just a crisp color. So we're going to have to go in there and clean it up a little bit. So we want to index color. I think the lowest you can do on this one is 5, but we want to customize the colors that we pick. So it's gonna just take out all of the unwanted colors that were inputted in from that Photoshop into Photoshop. And there you go. So there is your indexed color. So now we have 4 colors selected. And when we go in, it's a lot clearer, but then you still have a couple little pixels that were not so clear in the blue. So you see that there's green in that blue line, and you really want to make sure that it's super crisp. And that stepping is how the stitches are going to be created to create that artwork. You can see it there, taking out those little green pixels so that there's no confusion when it's inputted into your program, whatever machine that it's going to be made on. And just to finalize it here, see, clean it up. It needs to be so precise, right? And now it's a clean line. And everything can be judged around and, moved, the lines can be moved. Again, I would do that. It's easier to do that in Illustrator. So I would then go back to your Illustrator file to fix the lines if you need to fix something, and then redo this process in Photoshop. And I always, again, save it so that I can go in and edit it. And I've saved it as the Photoshop version of the BMP file. And I chose 8-bit is fine for the amount. And there you have it. That is how to create your BMP file. So now we look at, so I've also done the sleeve here. I'm not gonna pull you through that process, but it's the exact same. You put your guidelines and you make it work that way. And you can see I'm using the same 4 colors, the red, the green, the yellow, and the blue. And so the yellow is your jacquard. And when we look back at the garment, the blue would be that 1x1 rib stitch placement. And then your green would be your rib transfer. And then the red is your jersey stitch, and that's your waist. And so that's all of the waist that you're gonna have for that specific garment. And this is on a tubular machine. Again, this is just showing it as a flat, two-dimensional product, but really it's going to be a circular, seamless tube that will be coming off with the same artwork. And then using that FABRICAST, Cotton Incorporated's FABRICAST stitch structure placement, you can input a lot of those files into your simulation, and you can simulate what that garment's going to look like in the end, and really be able to have something that you can see before it shows up in your artwork. So yeah, that's the end of my my presentation.
Thank you so much.
Questions?
Yeah, we are getting quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to give everyone a minute to continue to type those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And in the meantime, I want to talk to you a little bit more about our resources we have at Cotton Incorporated and our Cotton Works website. So if you're interested in learning more about knitting, we have several resources up on the website. You can find information on knit basics, single knits, double knits, as well as knit design. If you're looking to source cotton knit fabric, you can also find a list of US cotton knit fabric mills. Just go to cottonworks.com/topics/knitting to find all of that information. And then if you go to the next slide, Alexis, a recording of today's webinar as well as the slides will be available on the website at cottonworks.com/webinars. On that same page, you can find all of the other past webinars that we've done, including on topics such as cotton biodegradability, it's a big word, cotton's life cycle assessment, and more. And then if you go to the last slide, Alexis, please take a minute after our Q&A to fill out a short survey about today's webinar. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's webinar and what sort of topics you want covered in the future. So with that, I'm going to move on to some of our questions for Alexis. So this is a good question, Alexis. When you send your artwork files to the factory, do you have to create separate files for every size, or in general, are the factories able to do the grading for you?
In general, the factories are able to do the grading for you. I don't think they would expect you to start, making the artwork files for your graded spec. It ends up being so much math, and you end up spending a lot of time, where they will be able to put it into their system. And if your grade rule is, say, 1/2 inch, per size, they'll be able to put that artwork and add the specific areas of needles where it needs to be added in throughout the garment. So they shouldn't request you to send artworks unless you are doing, okay, this is a very specific thing. If you're doing some type of artwork, in the center of your garment, and you say, maybe your size small is a little bit smaller than your extra large, they might say, okay, can you give me a placement of grading, but they won't necessarily make you grade that artwork.
Okay. And then are you able to what is the difference that using different yarn types would have on your final garment, and what might that effect might that have on your artwork?
So different yarn types, you see it with intarsia, so that would be an intarsia or striping in. So sometimes it affects your stitch count, right? So even if it's on the same gauge and you're doing the same stitch, you bring in another color, it can affect it very slightly. Like say if you have something in several different colorways, sometimes a colorway can come out an inch shorter than your other, your main colorway that you were sampling with. So artworks can change, and the placement of it can be slightly different depending on the different color that you're using. What was the other part of that question?
Just yeah, how it would affect maybe your final fabric and how that would affect your final. So I think you're right on with stitch
Yep.
count changing.
Yep, stitch count, definitely. So your placement might be off a little bit, especially if you're changing different colors.
I think as well, if you go from like a singles 30 cotton to a singles 20 cotton, you're going to have a different stitch count.
Yes.
It'll
Yep.
change the file. Talking about that image again and engineering certain areas, can you engineer Lycra into those certain areas on the circular diagrams, and how do you designate those areas?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit easier to engineer Lycra, say on like a full fashioned garment if you want it in a very specific area, because you're gonna stripe it in and then you're gonna take it out. If you only need it in the rib at the bottom, you can do that as well on a circular, but you know, sometimes you can't just bring it in for one area. So you really have to rely on your stitch structure and that's why we body map stitch structure. You can have the whole thing plated with Lycra, but that stitch structure is really going to determine how it comes in or, you know, and out. Just depends on, you can use shaping that way. I've never seen a circular garment where it comes in just for one area because you're going to have ends that are on the inside. And sometimes those can be pulled or can be cut, or you know, you can run into some problems. So
And speaking of that kind of limitation on circular with knitting true intarsia in circular, are you familiar with any domestic like US factories that knit that true intarsia?
I don't know any domestic US factories that have that specific, I think it's a TL2 machine Santoni makes to create that true intarsia. I know they're still in the process of developing that machine. And you don't see a lot of factories that have a true intarsia circular machine yet because it's expensive knitting and most people would rather just not spend the extra money per unit. So they're not as well, like you don't see as many of those machines. I don't know of any in the US right now. And I'm sure, you know, things change very, very rapidly.
All right, we're gonna do one more question. And can you use this same method of design for both flatbed machines and circular machines?
Yes, you can use the same method. So if you think about if you're just designing artwork in general, so it's like a way to create color in your garment, you can create a big, you know, square file, and then you can place it where you want it on that panel. So say, you know, you have a front panel and the whole thing is in that, you know, artwork file. You can place it where you want it and then lock it in and then create a clipping mask and make sure it's like that. So yeah, same concept, just you can make it into that specific panel shape.
Okay. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, there were a few questions about the 3D files and the 3D simulation. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we have these FABRICAST files available from download on the Cottonworks website. And those files are available for Clo and Browseware, which are two 3D simulation programs you may be familiar with. So we have those two file types available for the FABRICAST collection online. And with that, I wanted to say thank you so much, Alexis. We're 2 o'clock on the dot, so great timing today.
Perfect.
Thank you, Alexis, for teaching today's webinar, and I hope that everyone enjoyed it. You can find this webinar within 24 to 48 hours on our website, cottonworks.com/webinars. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.